For more than 300 years, one symbol has appeared wherever power seems to gather quietly: on rings, on gravestones, on old city buildings, in the portraits of judges, generals, businessmen, presidents, and men whose names survived long after the rooms they met in disappeared. A square, a compass, and just enough secrecy to make people ask the wrong question. Most people think the Freemasons are one organization, one chain of command, one hidden council, one group with one plan. They are not, and that may be the first thing that makes them so difficult to understand. Freemasonry is not one building, one lodge, or even one country's organization. It is a vast tree of local lodges, grand lodges, rites, degrees, affiliated orders, rival systems, historic splits, and private traditions that developed differently across Britain, America, Europe, Canada, Australia, India. Some branches recognize each other, some do not. Some use the same symbols, but reject each other's authority. Some describe themselves as charitable fraternities. Others became tied to scandals, serious enough for governments to investigate them, pass laws, or demand that public officials disclose their membership. So before asking whether Freemasonry influenced history, there is a more basic question. What exactly is it? And why has something that began in a handful of lodges become one of the hardest private networks in history to map? The modern story begins in London on June 24, 1717. 4 existing lodges met at the Goose and Gridiron Tavern near St. Paul's Cathedral. They elected a Grand Master and formed what became known as the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. No empire fell that night. No government changed hands, but a new model had been created. Separate local lodges could now be linked under a larger authority. They could receive warrants, follow shared rules, recognize one another, and become part of something bigger than the men inside a single room. The timing mattered. Europe was changing. Cities were expanding. Trade was growing. Merchants, soldiers, lawyers, clergy, civil servants, and educated men were looking for access to networks beyond family, church, and court. The lodge offered a private room where men from different professions could meet under the same rituals, symbols, ranks, rules, and obligations. Its language came from stonemasonry. The square became a symbol of measurement. The compass became a symbol of boundaries. The tools of builders became moral metaphors. But by the 18th century, Freemasonry was no longer simply about men who cut stone or raised cathedrals. It had become a system of identity. A man could enter as an apprentice, pass through degrees, learn private signs and passwords, and join a fraternity that existed far beyond his own city. This is where the first misunderstanding begins. The basic unit of Freemasonry is not the Grand Lodge. It is the local lodge. A local lodge is where a man is initiated. It is where the foundational degrees are given: entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. Those 3 degrees form the base of what Britain often calls craft masonry, and North America often calls Blue Lodge masonry. The local lodge is the doorway. Without it, there is no route into the wider system. Above it sits a Grand Lodge, and this is where the tree begins to split. A Grand Lodge does not rule the entire world. It governs lodges inside a particular jurisdiction: a country, a state, a province, or a region. England has its own Grand Lodge. Scotland has its own. Ireland has its own. American states traditionally have their own. Canada has provincial systems. Australia has state-based systems. France has more than one major Masonic organization. Each body decides who it recognizes, who it rejects, and which lodges it considers legitimate. There is no single worldwide Masonic headquarters issuing orders to every lodge in every country. But that does not make the structure simple. It makes it harder to see. Every Grand Lodge can have its own rules, constitution, membership records, rituals, recognized partners, political history, and relationship with the state around it. 2 men can wear similar symbols, call themselves Freemasons, and still belong to systems that do not accept each other as equal. The structure is not one pyramid. It is a forest of connected and competing authorities. That is the root of the tree. Now come the branches. Once a man becomes a master mason, his path can divide into multiple directions. One of the best-known branches is the Scottish Rite. Its name suggests ancient castles, Highland rituals, and a direct line to medieval Scotland. But the modern structure is more complicated. In North America, the Scottish Rite is a separate system built on the first 3 lodge degrees. It adds further degrees from the 4th through the 32nd, while the 33rd degree is generally an honorary distinction within that particular system. The internet often treats the 33rd degree as the top floor of a hidden pyramid, the place where every secret is finally revealed. But the reality is less neat. A master mason does not become less of a mason because he never joins the Scottish Rite, and a Scottish Rite member does not automatically command every other Masonic body. Higher numbers create an image of hierarchy. The real picture is a set of parallel organizations, each with its own leadership, ceremonies, titles, archives, and internal culture. Then there is the York Rite. In the United States, the name is commonly used for several linked bodies, including the Royal Arch, Cryptic Masonry, and Masonic Knights Templar. To an outsider, it can look like one long staircase. In reality, it is better understood as connected rooms. A Mason may enter one and not another. Rules change by jurisdiction. Some bodies use more explicitly Christian language. Others are organized around broader ideas of belief. The names sound ancient, but the system is fragmented, regional, and often far less unified than the myths surrounding it. And then the tree grows wider. There are the Shriners, perhaps the most publicly visible Masonic-affiliated organization in North America, known for their red fezzes, parades, hospitals, and public events. There is the Order of the Eastern Star, built around Masonic family connections. There are youth groups, research lodges, invitation-only orders, women's Masonic systems, and co-Masonry, which historically brought men and women into mixed lodges. There are also continental systems in Europe that developed outside the recognition networks favored by British and American regular Grand Lodges. One person can occupy more than one circle at once: a local lodge, a Scottish Rite body, a shrine temple, a York Rite chapter, perhaps another invitation-only order. The square and compass may be the public sign, but behind it can sit a maze of overlapping memberships. That is why the average person sees one symbol and assumes one organization, but they may only be looking at one doorway into a much larger maze. American history reveals another side of the tree. In the late 18th century, Prince Hall and other free black men in Boston were excluded from white colonial lodges. Their later charter for African Lodge No. 459 became a foundation of Prince Hall Freemasonry, a predominantly black Masonic tradition that developed because equal access to mainstream lodges had been denied. That one chapter changes the entire picture. Freemasonry was never simply one invisible brotherhood moving through history as a single body. It was shaped by class, race, empire, nationality, religion, and access to power. It divided where societies divided. It expanded where empires expanded. It created parallel institutions where people were excluded from older ones. And yet, despite every split, the symbols remained familiar. The aprons, the columns, the square and compass, the handshakes, the degrees, the private meetings. That continuity created a powerful illusion. It made the whole tree look like one shadow. And whenever there is a shadow, people begin to imagine what might be hiding inside it. This is where Freemasonry becomes more than a historical fraternity. It becomes a political question. A private group is not automatically dangerous because it is private. A network is not automatically corrupt because influential people belong to it. But when membership is hidden, when members share obligations, when public officials belong to private fraternities, and when the public cannot see where private loyalty ends and public duty begins, suspicion becomes inevitable. That suspicion did not appear from nowhere. Across different countries and periods, Masonic membership has appeared near political influence, police controversies, colonial administration, elite social networks, and state scandals. That does not prove one central global command, but it does show how private networks can operate beside public institutions, often beyond public scrutiny. And the public may not see their real reach until a document leaks, a list is found, a court case opens, or a political crisis forces the hidden structure into view. That is why this map matters. Without it, every symbol becomes evidence of a conspiracy. Without facts, every denial becomes proof of innocence. Both are mistakes. The real story is more unsettling. Freemasonry did not become influential because one hidden leader controlled the planet from a locked room. It became influential because it created belonging across distance. A merchant in one city could share a symbolic language with a soldier in another. A local lodge could connect to a grand lodge. A rite could add status. An invitation-only body could create a smaller circle within the circle. Over time, those overlapping loyalties could become invisible to everyone outside the door. That is the architecture of the tree. Local lodge at the root. Grand lodge above it. Rites and degrees spreading outward. Affiliated orders growing around the trunk. Separate national systems branching in different directions. Historical divisions creating parallel forests. And beyond the actual Masonic structure, a darker layer of stories begins to grow. The Knights Templar, the Illuminati, Rosicrucians, secret political lodges, missing treasures, hidden archives, and scandals that made entire countries wonder whether private brotherhood had entered public power. Some of those stories are rooted in documents. Some are rooted in fear. Some were invented long after the events they claimed to describe, and some became powerful because the truth was always difficult to see from the outside. So this is not the final map of Freemasonry. It is the first map. Because before we examine the lodges tied to political scandals, before we trace the legend connecting the Knights Templar to modern Freemasonry, before we open the files on the Illuminati, the P2 Lodge in Italy, the British Empire, and private societies that gathered powerful men behind closed doors, we need to understand one thing. There was never just one Freemasonry. There was a tree. And the deeper you go into its branches, the harder it becomes to tell where tradition ends, where private loyalty begins, and where history becomes something the public was never meant to see.